Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we are continuing our study of the Sefer Job, the book of Job, about to read chapter 33, Perek Lamed Gimel. Elihu has introduced himself in the last chapter. He said, I need to speak now because you guys have reached an impasse. And there's something beyond what you guys are saying that I will contribute to this conversation. I am not going to do just like the three friends have stated and just simply call Eov a Russia, call Eov an evil person, and this is how they answered the question of why Eov was suffering. I am going to go past what Eov had done, which was to declare that I am innocent. I don't deserve this suffering, and therefore Eov would challenge God and say, God, you come here and let's have it out. Let's have a court case and let me prove to you that I'm innocent. Both of whom, according to Elihu, were making the critical mistake of assuming that God's justice plays out in this world of action that you and I live in which we see action and reaction as a form of justice. But rather, Elihu gave us a hint that this interaction where our relationship with God takes place, where God's justice takes place, is in a different realm. It's in the realm of the spirit, in the realm of understanding, in the realm of the mind, in the realm of the heart. And let's see how Elihu develops this idea in chapter 33. V'ulam. So now, however, right, but now, Shema na Eov miloi. Eov, listen to my words, v'chol divorai ha'azina, and pay attention to all of what I say. In other words, I'm not giving you a quick one-liner answer. If you want a quick soundbite, you go, watch your favorite cable news channel, right? But I'm not giving you a quick soundbite. This is going to take a while, Eov says, and I need to explain what I'm saying, so pay attention to everything I have to say. This is, of course, always important for us to remember. We don't get things in sound bites. Deep ideas require, time to develop the argument and to develop all the different angles and so on and so forth, so that a person can truly convey the idea that he or she is trying to convey, and so that the person who's the recipient of that idea can truly understand it and grasp it. Hine nafasachti pi. Now I have, finally, I have opened my mouth. Dibra leshoni b'chiki, my tongue is now speaking in my mouth. So, in other words, time for me to start talking already. I know this is kind of wordy, but, this is the style of speech. As several times I mentioned throughout this book, that this kind of gives us the idea that this is an old-fashioned like play where the actor gives a whole monologue. So here we go. Yosher libi amoroi. This is verse 3. The Yosher libi are my words. What I'm speaking is the uprightness or the straightness or the properness of my soul, of my heart. Those are my words. My words are for my soul. This is crucial because this is what Elihu is trying to convey. I'm not talking to that I'm good because of the things that I've done, right? Because I'm a good, right? But rather because of what's coming from my soul, my heart is with you. My words are coming from my heart. V'das sifasai borur milelu. And the knowledge that I am imparting with my lips are being spoken clearly, right? Clearly, so listen to what I'm saying, because this is an idea that I'm conveying, right? I'm not, ruach el asasani. It is the Spirit of God that has created me. V'nishmas shadai techayeni. It is literally the soul of God, the breath of God, which gives me life. So he's recognizing that God is a creator, right? God is what made us, is the being that created us, and it is His life that is within us that gives us and sustains us everything that we have, everything that we are. In other words, so when we're talking about God's justice, we're talking about the justice of the Creator that lives and resides within our souls. Im tuchal hashiveni, if you can answer me. So now he's going back, right, to say, feel free, Eov, listen to what I'm telling you, but feel free if you have an answer for me. Feel free to talk. In other words, if I say something wrong, go ahead. You can put in front of me, right, your ideas. If I say something wrong, you can set them up in front of me and argue. All right, go ahead, stand before me. You know, Hein ani keficha lo'el. And then he says, behold, I am just like your mouth in front of God. In other words, I speak before God just like you speak before God. We are all the same. Mechomer koratzti gamani. I am also created of the same material, the same clay, the same earth that you are created of. So I'm not speaking to you because I'm more special than you or I'm better than you, right? We're all come from the same earth, right? And we all are sustained and created by the same God. Don't be afraid of what I say. This does some smack a little bit of haughtiness, like, all right, we got the idea, but again, you have to understand the style of the way they spoke. In other words, don't be afraid of me. In other words, don't be overwhelmed by my arguments. Sometimes people will listen to an argument, and even though they know deep down that they have a way to rebut that argument, or they don't agree, or it's based on faulty logic or whatever, they don't speak up because they're afraid to speak up because of the power of he who is speaking. But here, Elihu is telling Eov, right? Don't be afraid of me. Right? And the that which I am pushing on top of you, the pressure with which I am pushing you is not heavy. In other words, I'm not pressuring you to listen to me, that you have to agree. Ach amartov aznoi v'kol milin eshma. However, you have already spoken. I have listened to you. I have heard you. Here in verse 8, Elihu is saying to Eov, right, that that I've listened. In other words, I've been humble enough to sit and listen and try to absorb Kol Milin Eshma. I've heard the words that you have spoken, and I've heard them. I haven't ignored you. I'm actually responding to you. Zach ani beli fosha. And what are the words that I heard you say? I'm going to sum up everything you said with the following three verses. This is verse 9, 10, and 11. Zach ani beli fosha. I am clean without sin. Chaf anochi. I am innocent. Velo avon li, and I do not have any sins. Hein tinu os olai himsa. However, he, in other words, he with a capital He, God, nonetheless puts upon me punishments. Yachsheveni le'oyev lo, and he considers me as if I am his enemy, like the kind of enemy that he would punish. Yosem basad ragloi, right? He has stuck my feet into plaster. Yishmor kol chosai, and he watches all of my ways. So there's in these three verses, he summed up his understanding of all of Eov's speeches. Number one, I'm innocent. I'm a good person. I don't have sin, or certainly not sin that is deserving of this punishment. Number two, right? It is God who is meting out those punishments. This already takes a certain level of faith, so to speak, that it is God. He's not denying God. It's God that has this against me. And he's considering me an enemy because Eov is admitting that punishments are the kinds of things that one gives to an enemy, right? And Yosem Basad Ragloi, right? He makes me stuck, that I can't move forward, right? And Yishmar Kol Chosai, and God knows my ways. He knows my path, right? So Eov is making several assumptions, right? Many of which, seem to be corroborated by the prophets all over in the Torah in general, that God knows what we're doing. Yishmor kol ha'chosai, so he knows that I'm innocent. And nonetheless, he is punishing me. And that punishments are things that are deserving of for a person who's evil, a person who's against God. But I am not one of those. I am innocent. So all of this is a summary of Eov's argument. Now, those of us that have been studying together saw in Eov, not quite like Elihu said, but is saying we saw it was a little bit more, his arguments were a little bit more nuanced than this, but for the most part, Elihu did summarize Eov's arguments, pretty well. So he responds now in verse 12, Henzos lo tzadakta e'encha ki yirbe Eloah me'enosh. The um the point here is that in this idea, right? Lo tzadakta, you are not correct, right? Here, tzedek is not so much in the sense of righteous, right? That you are not righteous, but rather you are not correct in the sense like if you're having an argument, who is the one who is correct? Who's the one that wins the argument because he or she is correct? So lo tzadakta encha. So this is what I'm answering you. I'm answering you that you are not correct in what you said before, right? Why is it that you're not correct? Not because remember the friends said you were a Rasha, you were evil, that's why you're suffering, right? But I'm going to say it for a different reason. The reason why you're not correct is because ki yirbe Eloah me'anosh, because God is greater than man. Now, what this means is, what he's stating is, God is different than man. In other words, what you said before, all of those arguments make sense if you assume that God runs like human beings do, right? If God runs like human beings do, then he punishes his enemies. If you're innocent, if I know you're innocent and I know you don't deserve it, and then justice would dictate that I shouldn't give you punishment. But God is different. God is more than man, right? God is above man. God is in a different level. Madua elav rivos. This is verse 13. Why are you bringing arguments to him, right? Rivos, arguments, where you debate logic and you say, I deserve this, I don't deserve this, this is innocent, this is guilty, I'm innocent, he's guilty, so on and so forth, right? You're bringing those arguments before him. He will not answer all of your complaints, right? That's not how God works. God doesn't work in such a way that he answers the arguments that you and I have, right? Kiva achas yidaber el. There is one way that God speaks to us. This is verse 14. Uv'shtayim lo yishurena. But yishurena here is the language of to see, right? Right. In other words, God speaks to us in one way, and I'm going to tell you in a minute. Elihu is going to what's that way that God speaks to us, but He does not speak to us in no, I'm sorry, V'shtayim lo yishurena, and man doesn't see it. Yishurena, I said, is the language of see it. Man doesn't see it if God speaks it over and over again, right? In other words, what you have to recognize is that God only talks to us. We have our relationship with God only in one way. When we find and feel the justice of God is in one way. I know we're sitting on the edges of your seat. Okay, how is this way? But the point in this verse 14 is, but it's not something that you will understand if he speaks to you twice or three times or four times. The more he tells you, that's not what's going to help you understand it, right? You have to understand that one way, that one plane on which we relate to God. And that is verse 15. Bachalom chazyon laila, in the dream, in visions of the night, benefol tardema anashim, when people are falling asleep, bitnumos ale mishkav, when they are asleep on their beds, right? What is he saying here? Is he saying that every person goes to sleep and sees prophecy in the dreams? What he's saying is it's in our hearts and our minds when we're lying in bed and we're thinking, when we think thoughts, when we develop in our hearts our feelings and our the things that we notice, the things that we recognize, the things that we learn during the day. Oz yigle ozen anashim. That is how God reveals, in other words, reveals his secrets to human beings. Uvemosaram yachtom. And this is how God signs off on knowledge as he gives over such knowledge. It's in our hearts, in our minds. And those thoughts and those feelings, why is Elihu talking about the feelings of the night? We see this in Psalms often, right? And he's also paraphrasing what Eov had mentioned and what Eliphaz had mentioned, the idea of these visions at night. But when one is lying at night and it's dark, one thinks about all of the anxieties that he or she has during the day, all of the things, either the good things that happen today, the bad things, planning out what they're going to do the next day. It is in these times when we feel the anxiety, when we feel the fear, right, which Elihu is about to describe, the fear that we have of the problems that we have in our life, right? Obviously, this happens during the daytime too, but he's using this image of lying there at night, right? And what is it when we start to feel these things and we start to worry, right? How is it that I'm behaving? And we start to worry about how God is looking at us, right? Are we going to get the new job? Are we going to figure out a way to pay this big bill? Are we going to be able to overcome this illness or this suffering? Am I doing things right? And what this does is it pushes us to act properly. L'hasir adam ma'asev, verse 17. This fear takes us away from doing sins, from doing bad things. V'geva migever yichaseh. How does it do that? It takes us away from pride. It takes us away from gava. If you think about these kinds of things at night and you realize how vulnerable we are, and we realize how human we are, how vulnerable we are to suffering, how anything can go wrong, right? It takes away our pride, right? And the first step when it takes away our pride is, and then he's going to describe in the next few verses, is a pretty a scary experience to us, and that is yachsoch nafsho mini shachas, right? By removing this pride from us, right? God is in essence saving us from falling in deep down into the pit of nothingness. It saves us from our lives being taken away by the sword, right? Why is that? How does that work? How does this humility? How does humility before God bring us and save us from sin and save us from our lives going deep into the pit and just dying by sword? Because it as follows. Because verse 19, when a person is lying in pain and worry on his bed, son, and all of his bones, or many of his bones, are shaking, right? And at this time, he's not thinking about pleasures of this world. When you're all worried, you can't think about that great meal that you had last night, right? Right? V'nafshom achal tava, right? And his soul is rejecting the usual things that we desire, right? We think about the things that we desire when we're happy, when we're not anxious, but when we're worried, when we're nervous, when we're scared, right? We're not thinking about the things that we enjoy, that we want, and the pleasure. We're not thinking about being hungry. When a person is anxious and depressed, they usually, don't have much of an appetite. Yichel b'saro meroi, and his flesh just wastes away because of to the point where he cannot see it anymore, because he can't see his own body anymore. Everything he's worried about, v'shupu atzmosav lo ru'u, right? And his bones are rubbed away and cannot be seen anymore. But tikrav l'shachas nafsho v'chayasol lamimisim, right? And his soul is getting close to the depth of the pit, right? Right. Remember, we said before that this life in the mind, in the heart, in the soul, right, is where we experience these fears and anxieties, and it saves us. But right now, he's describing how we get close, and in a minute we're going to learn how it saves us. And his life is getting close to those forces that are going to bring it to his death, to his end. But then what happens? If within his heart there is literally a malach, as an angel or a representative of God. But over here, the idea is this world in the mind, in the heart, where he's lying in bed and he's worried. How am I going to pay these bills? How am I going to get over this bad news? How am I going to get past this terrible experience that I'm going through? But then, and he thinks to himself, I should have done this. I should have done that. I didn't act properly. I didn't do the right thing. I didn't make the right decisions. But in his mind and in his heart, he thinks to himself, there is one thought that he says, you know what? But I did, right? There is that one malach, that one angel that comes in and says into our hearts and our minds and says, but wait, I have a saving grace, so to speak. I'm an honest person. I'm a good person. I'm a hardworking person, right? So those thoughts that you have, Eov, while you're experiencing, and he's describing an experience that it takes place completely within the soul of a person. He's not describing right now a physical experience. He's describing an emotional experience in the heart, right? Hagid li Adam Yashro, right? That thing, that voice in our heads tells him Yashro, tells him how proper, how good you are. You're a good person. You've done something good today. You were nice to somebody today. You did something good today. You did something productive today. You took care of yourself. You took care of your family. You took care of the people around you, right? And you think and you realize in your heart and your soul that there's purpose to everything you've been going through. All of this experience, this is where we relate to God. Not in that world out there, that world of action and reaction, that world of justice, that world of punishments and rewards. No. But in our hearts and in our minds, we say, you know what? I'm a good person. Vayichunenu. That is where God gives us mercy, verse 24. Vayomer. And this is where God says, this is where he says, Pidoehu meredas shachas. I have redeemed him. Or actually, this is a command. Redeem that man from going all the way down to the depth of the pit. Matzasi kofer. I have found what with which to redeem this person. When the person realizes that, then he develops his relationship based on his love for God, right? On his relationship with God. And that moment, that's where one experiences God's grace. It's in our hearts, it's in our minds, it's in our souls that we experience it. Rutfash bezaro minohar. And this is where God commands now. Now that flesh that was withering away, shaking with anxiety, has now become healthy and strong and moist, like a youthful, healthy young man. Yashuvli me'alumav, bring him back to the days of his youth when he was strong. Yetar, and this, it's in that circumstance, the prayer that God wants to hear is not the prayer that the three friends were telling you, Eov, to pray because you're a Russia, you're a bad person, and you need to repent and you need to feel bad about your sins. No, it's when you recognize that you're a good person, when you know that you are an honest and righteous person, when you feel it, when you know it in your bones and in your heart, that's when you turn to God. That's when, verse 26, Yetar Eloah, that's when you go and pray to God by your tseyu, and he gives you acceptance, and he brings you in, and he wants you, and he desires you. Vayar Panov Betrua, and then when you see his face, meaning God's face, you see it with trua, with shouts of joy and happiness, right? Because, yes, I'm experiencing you, God, because, look, I am a good person. Then Eov, you can rejoice in those things that you've done which are good, right? Vayoshav le'enosh tidko. That is how God brings back to a human being his righteousness and makes him righteous. Not in this outward world, right? In the outward world, that's not the plane on which we relate to him. Yoshor al anoshim. He at this point, right, he can declare to other human beings. That's how Eov, you, right, but he's saying he in this case, can come to other people like the three friends and announce, Vayomer, and say, Chatasi, yes, I have sinned, V'yashar ha'avesi, and I have done things that were proper, I have twisted them, below shavali, it wasn't worth it for me. Out of gladness and happiness and love, he says, you know what, this is not, yeah, you're right, I did have flaws, right, but those aren't flaws, those aren't problems, because I fixed them, right? And look at me now, right? It wasn't worth it for me to go down the bad path. That's why I've chosen the good path. And look at me now. I have redeemed, or he has redeemed his soul and kept it from going down into the pit. And his life will now see the light. Now, when a person recognizes this and recognizes his righteousness before God and recognizes how fortunate and lucky he is, that's when he sees that light. Hen kol ele yifal el. All of these things are the things which God does. Pa'amayim shaloshim gover. Many times over and over again with human beings throughout our lives, we go through this process over and over again. We don't come to that realization and see and feel that light in relationship, and then all of a sudden the rest of our lives are perfect. The next night we'll be lying in bed and we'll be anxious again and we'll be worried again. But we still have to overcome that. Over and over again. God brings his soul back from the pit le'or b'or hachayim, to receive the light and to shine with the light of life itself. Hakshev Eov Shemali, listen Eov, listen to me. Hacharesh, be quiet. In other words, even though I told you before, you can answer me when you want, but be silent. Vanochi adaber. I still have more to say, says Elihu. If you do have what to say, fine, go ahead and answer me. Daber ki chafafti tzadkecha. Speak, because I want to vindicate you. I want not to call you a rasha, not to call you an evil person, but I want to show how you are a tzaddik, how you are a righteous person. Im ayin ata shemali. But if you don't have anything else to say, then listen. Hacharesh, stay silent. And I will teach you wisdom. In other words, you Eov, you asked for wisdom. You asked God, where is wisdom? I need wisdom. I'm here to teach you wisdom. And this concludes the first part of Eov's speech. And remember what Elihu's speech to Eov. And remember, Elihu begged Eov, and thus begged us, not to draw your conclusions yet. Listen to my whole speech, and then make your judgments. This concludes, again, chapter 33. Looking forward to studying chapter 34, the rest of Elihu's talk, and the rest of this incredibly powerful book of Eov together. Have a wonderful day.